Let me take you back to where this all started. 3 years ago, I was a completely different person. I was broken, shattered, and drowning in my own pain. Life had hit me with blow after blow, and I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of my own existence. I had lost my job, my relationship had crumbled, and I felt more alone than I had ever felt in my entire life. During those dark months, I found myself seeking solace in the most unlikely place, a small cafe tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop on 7th Avenue. It was not the fanciest place in town, not even close. The walls were painted in faded yellow. The chairs creaked when you sat down, and the floor had seen better days. But there was something about this place that drew me in. Maybe it was the way the afternoon light filtered through the dusty windows, or maybe it was the fact that nobody bothered me there. I could sit for hours, lost in my thoughts, without anyone asking if I was okay. Every Sunday, without fail, I would make my way to this little cafe. I always chose the same table, table 6, tucked away in the corner where I could observe the world without being observed. I developed a routine that became as natural as breathing. Black coffee, rye toast, and a slice of apple pie. The same order every single time. The waiters probably thought I was the most predictable customer they had ever encountered. But what they did not know was that I was using this routine as an anchor. When everything else in my life felt chaotic and unpredictable, this one constant Sunday ritual kept me grounded. It gave me something to look forward to during the week, a small beacon of light in what felt like endless darkness. As weeks turned into months, I began to notice things. The way the elderly man at table 3 always ordered extra sugar for his coffee, but never used it. The young couple at table 8 who came in every Sunday to share a single piece of chocolate cake, the faces glowing with the kind of love that makes you believe in fairy tales. The single mother at table 2, who always looked exhausted, but still managed to smile at her twin boys as they colored on napkins. These observations stirred something deep within me. Despite my own pain, I found myself caring about these strangers. I wondered about their stories, their struggles, their dreams, and slowly, very slowly, words began to form in my mind. Not just any words, but poems. Raw, honest verses that seemed to pour out of me like water from a broken dam. At first, I wrote these poems just for myself. They were my way of processing the world around me, of making sense of the beauty and pain that coexisted in this small cafe. I would scribble them on napkins, on the back of receipts, on whatever piece of paper I could find. They were not perfect, they were not polished, but they were real. They were pieces of my soul transferred onto paper. I remember the exact moment when everything changed. It was a particularly cold Sunday in November, and I had been coming to the cafe for about 6 months. My usual waiter, James, brought me my check with his characteristic friendly smile. He was a college student, probably around 21, with dreams of becoming a teacher. He always treated every customer with genuine kindness, even when he was clearly exhausted from working double shifts. As I prepared to pay, I looked at the crumpled dollar bills in my wallet. The tip I was about to leave suddenly felt so insignificant, so impersonal. Here was this young man who had been serving me with such care and attention for months, and all I could offer him in return was a few pieces of paper currency. That is when I noticed one of my poems sticking out from my jacket pocket. I had written it the night before, inspired by watching James interact with a difficult customer. The poem was about kindness, about how small acts of compassion can ripple outward in ways we never imagine. Without really thinking about it, I folded the poem neatly and placed it under my coffee cup, along with the usual monetary tip. My hands were literally shaking as I did it. What if he thought I was crazy? What if he was offended? What if he threw it away without even reading it? But something inside me knew that this was right. This poem was worth more than any amount of money I could leave. It was a piece of my humanity, offered freely to another human being. I left the cafe that day with my heart pounding. I spent the entire week wondering if I had made a fool of myself. But the next Sunday, when I returned, James greeted me with the biggest smile I had ever seen. "That poem," he said quietly. "It meant everything to me. I was having the worst week of my life. and your words reminded me why I love what I do." That was the moment I knew I had stumbled onto something powerful. Words had the ability to heal, to inspire, to connect one's soul to another in ways that money never could. After that first successful poem, I made a decision that would change not only my life, but the lives of everyone who worked at that cafe. I decided to leave a poem with every tip, every single Sunday. Not just any poem, but personalized verses inspired by my observations of the staff and customers. I began to study the people around me more carefully. I noticed that Sarah, the weekend manager, always seemed stressed about something. Her poems were about finding peace in chaos, about the strength that comes from leading others. Miguel, the cook who sometimes came out to bus tables, received poems about the artistry of creating something beautiful from simple ingredients. Each poem was unique, crafted specifically for the person who would receive it. I spent hours during the week writing, rewriting, and perfecting these verses. I bought special paper, practiced my handwriting, and poured my heart into every single word. The reactions were incredible. At first, the staff thought I was eccentric, maybe even a little strange. But as weeks passed, something magical began to happen. They started looking forward to my visits. They began collecting my poems, sharing them with each other, and even displaying them in the kitchen. I learned later that they had given me a nickname, the Tipping Poet. They would speculate about who I was, what I did for a living, why I chose to express myself through poetry. But I preferred to remain mysterious. I never stayed long after finishing my meal, never engaged in lengthy conversations. I wanted the focus to be on the words, not on me. The cafe began to transform. The staff seemed happier, more connected to each other and to their customers. They would quote lines from my poems during their shifts, using them as mantras during difficult moments. The poems became a source of inspiration that rippled through the entire establishment. As months passed, I witnessed firsthand the incredible power that words could have on people's lives. Tom, one of the weekend waiters, told me that one of my poems about perseverance helped him get through his final exams. Lisa, part-time server, said that a poem about self-worth gave her the courage to leave an abusive relationship. These were not just casual compliments. These were life-changing moments triggered by simple words on paper. I began to understand that poetry was not just an art form. It was a healing tool, a bridge between hearts, a way to remind people of their inherent worth and dignity. My own life began to change as well. Writing these weekly poems forced me to look for beauty and meaning in the world around me. Instead of dwelling on my own problems, I was focused on uplifting others. The act of creating something beautiful for someone else became a form of therapy for my own wounded soul. I started venturing beyond the cafe, carrying small notebooks where I would jot down observations and ideas for future poems. I began to see the world through the eyes of a poet, finding inspiration in the most mundane moments. A mother comforting her crying child, an elderly man feeding pigeons in the park, a young couple sharing their first kiss. Everything became potential fodder for my weekly creations. The ritual of Sunday visits became the highlight of my week. I would arrive early, claim my usual table 6, and spend time observing before placing my order. I developed relationships with the staff that were built entirely on this unique form of communication. We knew each other through poetry, through shared moments of human connection that transcended ordinary social interactions. As my reputation as the tipping poet grew, I became something of a local legend. Customers would ask the staff about me, wanting to know who I was and why I did what I did. But I maintained my privacy, revealing only what was necessary through my actions and my words. I was not seeking fame or recognition. I was not trying to build a social media following or write a book about my experiences. I was simply a broken person who had found a way to heal by helping others heal. The anonymity was essential to the purity of what I was doing. The staff respected my privacy, never pushing for personal information or trying to extend our interactions beyond the necessary. They understood intuitively that the magic of what we were sharing would be diminished if it became too personal or too complicated. But they were curious, of course. I would catch them stealing glances at me as I wrote, trying to decipher the mystery of who I was and what motivated me. I became a puzzle they could not solve, a story without a clear beginning or end. Some customers started coming specifically on Sundays, hoping to witness the mysterious poet in action. The cafe began to develop a reputation as a place where something special happened, where art and life intersected in unexpected ways. For nearly 3 years, I maintained this ritual without interruption, through seasons and weather, through good days and bad. I showed up every Sunday with my coffee order and my poem. The staff came to depend on it, to look forward to it as a bright spot in their week. But there came a Sunday that would test everything I believed about the power of words. It was a rainy evening in late October. The cafe was quieter than usual, with only a few customers scattered throughout the space. The weather had been terrible all week, and it seemed to have affected everyone's mood. Even the staff seemed subdued, going through the motions of their jobs without their usual enthusiasm. I noticed immediately that there was a new face among the servers, a young woman, probably in her early 20s, with bright eyes that seemed dimmed by some invisible weight. She moved through her tasks mechanically, as if she was operating on autopilot. When she approached my table to take my order, I could see something in her expression that I recognized all too well. It was the look of someone who had reached the end of their rope, someone who was holding on by the thinnest of threads. "What can I get you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I placed my usual order, but something about her demeanor troubled me deeply. Throughout my meal, I found myself watching her, trying to understand what was causing her such obvious distress. I later learned that her name was Maya, and that this was her first week working at the cafe. She had taken the job out of desperation, needing money to pay for her college tuition and living expenses. But more than that, she was struggling with depression, with feelings of hopelessness that had been building for months. As I prepared to leave that evening, I felt a stronger compulsion than usual to write something meaningful. The poem that emerged was different from my usual offerings. It was more direct, more urgent, more personal. It was as if I could sense that this young woman needed something specific, something that could reach her in her darkest moment. The poem I wrote that night was unlike anything I had ever created before. It came from a place of deep intuition, as if I was channeling something beyond my own understanding. The words flowed onto the paper with an urgency that surprised me. To the one who serves with hands that shake, I see the storm you try to fake, but even clouds must someday part, and rain can rinse a heavy heart. Do not leave before the morning sun. The story's not yet over, one. As I folded the paper and placed it beneath my coffee cup, I had no idea that I was about to save a life. I had no idea that Maya had spent the entire day planning to end her own existence. I had no idea that she had already written goodbye letters to her family, had already decided that this would be her last shift at the cafe. I left that evening as I always did, with a polite smile and a quiet thank you. I walked out into the rain, pulled my jacket tight around me, and headed home, completely unaware of the miracle that was about to unfold behind me. Maya finished her shift in a daze. She was going through the motions of closing duties, her mind focused on the plan she had made for later that night. She had already decided how she would do it, where she would do it, and what she would leave behind. When she went to clear table 6, she almost discarded the folded paper without reading it. She had heard about the strange customer who left poems instead of tips, but she was too wrapped up in her own pain to care about anyone else's artistic expressions. But something, she could never explain what, made her pause. Maybe it was the careful way the paper was folded, or maybe it was some invisible force guiding her actions. Whatever it was, she found herself unfolding the poem and reading the words I had written specifically for her. What happened next was nothing short of miraculous. As Maya read those words, something fundamental shifted inside her. The poem was so specific, so directly addressed to her situation, that it felt like I was speaking directly to her soul, to the one who serves with hands that shake. How could I have known that her hands were literally trembling from anxiety and desperation? I see the storm you try to fake. How could I have perceived the mask she wore to hide her pain? Do not leave before the morning sun. How could I have known that she was planning to leave everything behind? She read the poem once, then again, then a third time. Each reading seemed to unlock something deeper inside her, something that had been buried beneath layers of despair and hopelessness. She told me later that it felt like someone had reached into her chest and restarted her heart. The words did not just speak to her mind. They spoke to her spirit, to the part of her that still wanted to believe that life was worth living. Maya stayed at the cafe long after her shift ended, sitting at table 6, holding that poem in her hands. She cried tears that she had been holding back for months. She felt the weight of her planned suicide lifting from her shoulders, replaced by something she had not felt in a very long time. Hope. The poem had reminded her that her story was not over, that even in her darkest moment, there was still a possibility for light. It reminded her that someone, a stranger, had seen her pain and had cared enough to offer words of comfort and encouragement. The next Sunday, Maya waited eagerly for my return. She had spent the entire week thinking about the poem, carrying it with her everywhere she went. She had read it so many times that she had memorized every word, every punctuation mark. She wanted to thank me, to tell me what those words had meant to her, to let me know that I had literally saved her life. She had prepared a speech, had practiced what she would say when I walked through the door, but I never came. Maya waited through her entire shift, checking the door every few minutes, hoping to see the mysterious poet who had changed her life. But table 6 remained empty. The usual Sunday routine was broken. She asked the other staff members about me, but they had no way to contact me. They knew me only as the tipping poet, a regular customer who showed up every Sunday without fail. They had never thought to ask for my name or contact information because they had never needed it before. Days turned into weeks, and still I did not return. Maya began to worry that something had happened to me. She wondered if I was okay, if I knew what impact my words had had, if I would ever come back to the cafe. The other staff members were concerned as well. My absence left a noticeable void in their weekly routine. They had come to depend on my poems as a source of inspiration and encouragement. Without them, the cafe felt somehow incomplete. What Maya and the staff did not know was that I had made a decision that night after writing that final poem. I had realized that my time at the cafe had come to an end, that my mission there was complete. The intensity of what I had felt while writing that poem for Maya had convinced me that I had accomplished what I was meant to accomplish in that place. I did not disappear from the world. I simply moved on to other places, other opportunities to spread hope and healing through words. I began visiting different establishments, finding new ways to share poetry with people who needed it. My Sunday ritual at the cafe had been preparation for a larger calling, but the impact of those 3 years did not end with my departure. Maya took that poem and did something extraordinary with it. She had it framed and asked the cafe manager if she could hang it next to the espresso machine. She wanted every new employee to see it, to understand the power that words could have in someone's life. The poem became part of the cafe's culture. New hires were told the story of the tipping poet, about how a stranger's words had saved a coworker's life. They were encouraged to look for customers who might be struggling, to offer kindness and compassion whenever possible. Maya herself became an advocate for mental health awareness. She began writing her own poetry, inspired by my example. She started a support group for young people dealing with depression and suicidal thoughts. She used her story and that poem as tools for healing others. The impact of that one poem began to ripple outward in ways I could never have imagined. Maya shared her story with friends and family, who shared it with their networks. The concept of using poetry as a form of human connection began to spread. Other customers at the cafe started leaving their own notes of encouragement for the staff. A culture of kindness and appreciation began to flourish, all traced back to that original tradition of tipping with poems. The local newspaper heard about the story and wrote an article about the mysterious tipping poet and the life that was saved. The article was shared thousands of times on social media, inspiring others to find their own ways of spreading hope and healing through art. Teachers began incorporating poetry into their lessons, encouraging students to write verses for family members and friends. Therapists started using poetry as a tool for helping clients process their emotions and connect with others. The simple act of leaving poems as tips had created a movement, a reminder that words have power, that art can heal, that one person's kindness can change the world in ways they might never fully understand. Looking back on those 3 years, I realized that I learned something profound about the nature of poetry and its role in human connection. Poetry is not just about beautiful language or clever metaphors. It is about truth, about seeing into the heart of another person and offering them exactly what they need to hear. Every poem I wrote was an act of love, an attempt to bridge the gap between one human soul and another. Whether the recipient was struggling with stress, loneliness, financial problems, or suicidal thoughts, the poem served as reminders that they were seen, valued, and worthy of care. The magic was not in my particular talent as a poet. The magic was in the intention behind the words. When you write from a place of genuine compassion, when you truly see another person and want to offer them hope, the words that emerge have a power that transcends ordinary communication. Maya's poem was the culmination of 3 years of practice, 3 years of learning to see people deeply and offer them what they needed most. It was not a coincidence that I wrote exactly what she needed to hear. It was the result of developing the ability to perceive suffering and respond with healing words. Conclusion: the power of one. Today, as I share this story with you, I want you to understand something important. You do not need to be a professional poet to change someone's life with words. You do not need special training or exceptional talent. All you need is the willingness to see other people truly, to care about their struggles, and to offer them hope in whatever form feels authentic to you. Maya is alive today because of a poem written by a stranger. She is thriving, helping others, spreading kindness, and healing wherever she goes. But she is also alive because she chose to unfold that piece of paper, chose to read those words, chose to believe that her story was not over. The cafe on 7th Avenue still displays that poem next to the espresso machine. New employees still hear the story of the tipping poet. The tradition of kindness continues, rippling outward in ways that can never be fully measured or understood. Some say I was an angel who appeared in that cafe for a specific purpose. Others think I was just a broken man who found healing through helping others heal. The truth is probably somewhere in between. I was a human being who discovered that words have power, that poetry can save lives, that one person's decision to choose love over indifference can change everything. And maybe, just maybe, that is what true poetry is for. Not to impress critics or win awards, but to remind us of our shared humanity, to offer hope in dark moments, to prove that we are all connected by invisible threads of compassion and care. If this story has touched your heart, if it has inspired you to look for ways to spread kindness in your own life, then my mission in telling it has been accomplished, because the real magic was never in the poems themselves. It was in the choice to care, the decision to act, the willingness to believe that one person really can make a difference. That is the truth I learned during those 3 years of Sunday visits. That is the message I want to leave with you today. And that is why I will never stop believing in the power of words, the healing nature of poetry, and the incredible capacity of human beings to save each other with nothing more than compassion, creativity, and hope.